The meeting room on Station Prime was bigger than any building on Earth. Its walls curved up like a giant dome, made from a crystal that changed colors with the light. Hundreds of different aliens sat in rows of floating chairs that adjusted to fit their strange bodies. Some had tentacles. Others looked like walking trees. A few were just clouds of glowing gas inside metal suits. Ambassador Krex moved to the center of the room. He was a Zorathian, which meant he looked like a giant octopus that could walk on land. His skin was purple and wet, and his 8 tentacles moved constantly as he talked. The translator device around his neck turned his gurgling sounds into words everyone could understand. "We gathered today to discuss the human problem," Krex said. His voice echoed through the huge room. "For 3 years we have banned them from all military work. I believe this ban should continue." Captain Jake Morrison stood in a small room above the main hall. The room had a clear floor made of super strong glass. He could see everything below, but the aliens couldn't see him. Jake was 40 years old with short gray hair and brown eyes that had seen too much war. His blue uniform was simple compared to the fancy robes and biosuits the aliens wore. Next to Jake stood Lieutenant Amy Watson. She was younger, maybe 30, with red hair tied back in a tight bun. Her fingers moved quickly over her datapad, recording everything the aliens said below. "They're really going to do it," Amy whispered. "They're going to make the ban permanent." Jake didn't answer. His hands were behind his back, squeezed into fists so tight his knuckles were white. Below them, another alien stood up. This one was a Velkari, a species made of pure energy. It looked like a person-shaped collection of blue lightning trapped inside a metal robot body. When it talked, its voice sounded like electricity crackling. "The humans are dangerous," the Velkari said. "They still use nuclear weapons. They still fight with projectile guns. They have no control over their emotions. Last month, a human cargo ship captain rammed his vessel into a pirate ship just because they insulted his crew. He destroyed both ships and killed everyone. This is not how civilized beings behave." Many aliens made sounds of agreement. Some clicked their claws. Others flashed different colors. A few stamped their feet or tentacles. Ambassador Krex raised one tentacle for silence. "The humans come from a world of constant war. For 10,000 years they have fought each other. They only stopped fighting among themselves when they found us. But they did not stop being violent. They just looked for new things to fight." A Thraxian representative stood next. The Thraxians looked like giant praying mantises, 7 feet, tall with green shells and huge black eyes. This one's name was Zek9, and when he talked, his mandibles clicked between words. "I have studied human history," Zek9 said. "They have words for types of war we cannot even imagine. Total war, nuclear war, biological war. They poison their enemies' water. They burn entire cities. They have a saying, 'All is fair in love and war.' This means they believe war has no rules." Jake felt Amy's hand touch his arm. She was trying to calm him down, but it wasn't working. Every word the alien said made him angrier. "Look at their ships," Zek9 continued. "Our ships are beautiful. They are works of art that happen to have weapons. Human ships are ugly boxes covered in guns. They build their ships with one purpose, to destroy things. They paint them gray and black to hide in the darkness of space. They name them after violent acts: vengeance, retribution, destroyer." More agreement from the crowd. Jake noticed that not all species were participating in the discussion. In one corner, the Malthari delegation sat silent. They were small, furry creatures that looked like teddy bears with 6 arms. The humans had saved their homeworld from an asteroid 2 years ago. But even they weren't speaking up for humanity now. "Let me share some numbers," Krex said, pulling up a holographic display. "Since humans joined the galactic community 7 years ago, violent incidents have increased by 300%. Property damage from fights involving humans costs billions of credits each year. 17 species have filed formal complaints about human aggression. But most of those fights were humans defending others," Amy muttered, loud enough for only Jake to hear. A new alien stood. This one was from a species Jake didn't recognize. It looked like a jellyfish floating in a tank of green water, with mechanical arms attached to the tank so it could gesture. "The humans sell weapons to anyone who pays them," the jellyfish thing said. "They sold antimatter bombs to the Crimson Cartel. They gave flamethrowers to the rebels on Kepler 442. They do not care about peace. They profit from war." Jake wanted to shout that humans only sold weapons to people fighting for freedom, but he had to stay quiet. Humans were only allowed to observe, not speak. "I have a proposal," Ambassador Krex announced. "We should extend the ban. No military contracts, no security work, no weapon sales, no participation in any conflict resolution. The humans can trade food and technology, but nothing related to war." The vote was called. One by one, each species representative raised their hand or tentacle or whatever they had. The display showed the results in real time. Green lights for yes, red for no. Green, 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 green. Not a single red light appeared. "The motion passes," Krex said. "Humans are permanently banned from all military activities in galactic community space." Jake turned and walked out of the observation room. Amy followed him, still recording on her datapad. "Captain, wait," she said as they walked down the metal corridor toward their shuttle. Jake stopped and turned to her. "They just made a huge mistake, Lieutenant. I know you're angry, but I'm not angry," Jake said, and Amy could see he was telling the truth. His face was calm, almost sad. "I'm worried. For them." "What do you mean?" Jake looked back toward the council chamber. "The outer rim colonies have been going quiet. One by one, communication just stops. The council thinks it's technical problems, but I've seen the last transmissions. Something's out there. Something bad." Amy's face went pale. "The Devourers? Maybe. Or something worse." Jake started walking again. "And when it gets here, when it starts eating their pretty ships and peaceful worlds, they're going to remember why humans are so good at war. They're going to beg us to save them. And will we?" Jake stopped at the shuttle door and looked back at Station Prime. The massive structure floated in space like a jewel, so confident in its safety and civilization. "Of course we will," he said. "We're humans. We protect people, even people who hate us. But they're going to learn something important." "What's that?" "That sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters, and we're very good at being monsters when we need to be." They boarded their shuttle and flew back to the human fleet stationed just outside galactic community space. As they flew, Amy looked at her datapad. The news was already spreading. Every alien news network was celebrating the permanent ban on humans. "They're actually happy about this," she said in disbelief. Jake stared out at the stars. "Let them be happy. It won't last long." 3 days later, his prediction came true. The first distress signal came from the outer rim, then another, then dozens more. The Devourers had arrived. The first alarm started as a soft beeping noise. Within seconds, it became a screaming siren that filled every corridor of Station Prime. Red lights flashed on every wall. The pleasant computer voice that usually announced mealtimes and docking schedules was now screaming one word over and over: "Emergency, emergency, emergency." Commander Lisa Park was eating breakfast in the human section of the station when the alarm started. She dropped her coffee cup and ran. Her boots slammed against the metal floor as she sprinted toward the emergency response center. Other humans, in the corridor, pressed against the walls to let her pass. They knew that look on her face. Something very bad was happening. Lisa burst through the doors of the response center. The room was chaos. Dozens of screens showed different parts of the galaxy, and most of them were flashing red. Aliens of every species were shouting in their own languages, creating a noise that hurt her ears. "Kyle, report!" Lisa shouted over the noise. Technician Kyle Brown was at the main console. He was a young man, maybe 25, with messy black hair and glasses that he kept pushing up his nose. His hands shook as he typed on his keyboard. "Commander, it's bad." "Really bad," Kyle said. His voice cracked with fear. The outer rim is gone. What do you mean gone? Kyle brought up a map of the galaxy on the main screen. The outer rim colonies were supposed to be shown as blue dots. Instead, there was nothing. Just empty space where 17 star systems used to be. The distress signals started 3 hours ago, Kyle explained. First from the Velkari defense station at Sigma 7. They said something was eating their ships, not destroying them. Eating them. Lisa felt her blood turn cold. Show me the last transmission from Sigma 7. Kyle typed a command and a video appeared. On screen. It showed the bridge of a Velkari warship. The elegant blue energy beings were flickering with panic. Behind them, through the window, Lisa could see something that made her stomach turn. It looked like a giant mouth made of metal and flesh. Tentacles the size of buildings reached toward the ship. Each tentacle was covered in smaller mouths, and each mouth was full of spinning teeth. As they watched, the tentacles grabbed the ship's hull and started chewing through it like it was made of paper. The Velkari captain was screaming something in their electrical language. Then the tentacles broke through the bridge window. The video cut to static. How many ships have we lost? Lisa asked. The Velkari sent their entire third fleet. 40 ships. They lasted 17 minutes, Kyle said. He pulled up another screen. The Thraxians sent their pride and joy, the Blade of Heaven. That's their biggest warship. It has shields that can stop a supernova. And 4 minutes. The Devourers ate through the shields like they weren't there. Lisa had been in the military for 20 years. She had fought in 3 wars. But she had never felt fear like this. The Devourers were legend, stories told to scare children. They were supposed to be extinct, killed off millions of years ago by some ancient civilization. The doors burst open and Ambassador Krex rushed in. His purple tentacles were pale with fear, leaving wet marks on the floor as he moved. Behind him came other council members, all of them looking terrified. Commander Park, Krex shouted. We need the human fleet immediately. Lisa turned to face him slowly. She crossed her arms and stared at the alien who, just 3 days ago, had called humans too violent for civilized space. I'm sorry, Ambassador. Humans are banned from all military activities. Your words, not mine. Krex's tentacles writhed in panic. This is not the time for pride. The Devourers are real. They're coming this way. How fast are they moving? Lisa asked Kyle, ignoring Krex. Kyle checked his instruments. At their current speed, they'll reach the core worlds in 72 hours, Station Prime in 90 hours. The Velkari representative flickered into the room, its energy form unstable with fear. You humans are the only ones who ever survived a Devourer attack. Your history speaks of the Battle of Mars Colony. Lisa nodded. That was 50 years ago. A small Devourer scout group found our solar system. We lost 3 million people, but we stopped them. How? Krex begged. Our weapons do nothing. Our shields are useless. We used nuclear weapons, Lisa said simply. Lots of them. And when those didn't work, we rammed our ships into them. And when that didn't work, we sent soldiers with bombs strapped to their backs to blow them up from the inside. The aliens in the room went quiet. The Thraxian representative, Zek 9, clicked, his mandibles in disgust. Suicide attacks, that's barbaric. It worked, Lisa said. She turned back to Kyle. Send a message to Admiral Joe Carter. Tell him the galaxy needs its monsters back. You'll help us? Krex asked, his voice small and scared. Lisa looked at him with cold eyes. We're humans. We always help, even when you hate us for it. She walked to the tactical display and started studying the Devourer movement patterns. But understand something, Ambassador. To stop these things, we're going to do terrible things. Things that will make you sick. Things that go against every civilized rule of war you have. We don't care anymore, Krex said. Do whatever you must. Lisa nodded and turned to Kyle. Open a channel to all human ships. Kyle's fingers flew over his console. Channel open, Commander. Lisa spoke clearly and calmly. This is Commander Lisa Park to all human vessels. The Devourers have returned. The galactic community has requested our help. I know they banned us. I know they called us monsters. But right now, they need monsters. She paused. All ships, prepare for war. Real war. Human war. Across human space, 200 ships received the message. On mining vessels, workers stopped what they were doing and ran to hidden weapon lockers. On cargo ships, false walls were torn down to reveal military-grade weapons. On the peaceful colony ship New Haven, families watched as the ship's hull opened to reveal missile launchers that had been hidden for years. The human fleet had never really disarmed. They had just gotten good at hiding their weapons. Admiral Joe Carter stood on the bridge of the battleship Retribution. He was an old man, 65 years old, with white hair and scars covering his arms. He had fought in the first Devourer attack. He still had nightmares about it. Admiral, we're receiving the tactical data from Station Prime, his communications officer Nina Ross reported. She was a tough woman with short black hair and eyes like steel. Joe studied the data on his screen. The Devourer swarm was massive, bigger than anything he had seen before. It stretched across 3 solar systems, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror that consumed everything in its path. Planets, moons, asteroids, ships, everything was food to them. They're not just eating, Joe said quietly. They're growing. Every ship they consume, they turn into more of themselves. Nina nodded grimly. At this rate, they'll be twice as large by the time they reach the core worlds. Joe stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the other human ships, gathering. They looked exactly like what they were, machines built for killing. No graceful curves like the alien ships. No beautiful colors. Just gray metal, sharp angles, and weapons. Send word to all ground forces, Joe ordered. Tell them to load the special weapons. Sir, those are banned by 17 different treaties, Nina reminded him. Joe turned to her with a grim smile. They banned us from fighting at all, remember? If we're going to break their rules, might as well break all of them. On the planet. Below, Marine Colonel Sam Hughes received the order. He stood in a massive hangar filled with human soldiers. They wore heavy armor that made them look like walking tanks. Their weapons were brutal things. Flamethrowers, acid sprayers, nuclear launchers. Marines, Sam shouted. His voice echoed through the hangar. The pretty aliens with their pretty ships and their pretty rules have a problem. The Devourers are coming, and suddenly being violent doesn't seem so bad to them anymore. The Marines laughed, but it was dark laughter. We're going to do things that will haunt us for the rest of our lives, Sam continued. We're going to become the monsters they always said we were. But we're going to save their lives doing it. Because that's what humans do. We take the darkness, so others can live in the light. Private Danny Miller raised his hand. He was just 18, fresh out of training. Colonel, what about the rules of engagement? Sam walked over to Danny and put a hand on his shoulder. Son, the Devourers are going to eat entire worlds. They're going to consume billions of innocent people. There are no rules anymore. There's just survival. The fleet began to move. 200 human ships carrying 50,000 soldiers and enough weapons to crack a moon in half. They headed straight for the Devourer swarm. As they traveled through hyperspace, Lisa stood on the observation deck of the command ship. Amy Watson joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. The aliens are scared of us, Amy said. Lisa took the coffee and sipped it. Good. They should be. They're about to see what humans really are when we stop pretending to be civilized. Will it be enough? Amy asked. Lisa watched the stars blur past the window. It has to be. If we fail, the galaxy dies. Admiral Joe Carter stood on the bridge of the Retribution and watched the nightmare unfold on his screens. The Devourer swarm was worse than anything in his nightmares. It looked like space itself was sick, infected with a disease made of metal and meat. Tentacles the size of moons reached out in every direction. Mouth-like openings appeared and disappeared, each one big enough to swallow a city. Distance to target? Joe asked. 500,000 kilometers in closing, Nina Ross answered. Her voice was steady, but Joe could see her hands shaking slightly. Admiral, I'm reading over 10 million individual Devourer units. Joe nodded. He had expected this. Open a channel to all ships. The communication system crackled to life. 200 human ships waited for his words. In the hangars of those ships, 50,000 Marines sat in their assault craft, ready to do the impossible. "This is Admiral Carter," Joe said. His voice was calm and clear. "In a few minutes, we're going to engage an enemy that has already destroyed 2 alien fleets. They expect us to fight like the others did, with honor, with rules, with tactics that make sense." He paused. "We're not going to do that." He walked to the tactical display and pointed at the swarm. "We're going to do things that will make the galaxy fear us forever. We're going to become the monsters they always said we were. But we're going to win. Because losing means everyone dies." Joe turned to his weapons officer. "Lieutenant Chen, are the special weapons ready?" "Yes, sir. Antimatter torpedoes loaded, nuclear mines deployed, chemical weapons online." These weapons had been hidden for years. The galactic community had banned them all, calling them too cruel, too destructive, too primitive. But humans had kept them anyway, hidden in secret compartments and false cargo holds. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Galactic Council," Nina said. "They want to know our battle plan." Joe almost laughed. "Tell them they don't want to know." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace right on top of the Devourer swarm. No warning, no announcement. They appeared and immediately opened fire with everything they had. The first wave was antimatter torpedoes. When matter and antimatter meet, they destroy each other completely, turning into pure energy. Each torpedo created an explosion like a small sun. The front edge of the Devourer swarm simply ceased to exist. But the swarm adapted quickly. The biomechanical horrors started to shift and change. Their skin became reflective, bouncing the energy away. Their tentacles grew shield generators made of stolen alien technology. "They're learning," Nina said. "Our energy weapons are becoming less effective." Joe had expected this too. Phase 2, launch the coffin ships. Coffin ships. That's what the crews called them, because anyone who flew one wasn't coming back. They were small vessels, barely big enough for one person, packed with nuclear weapons. Their only job was to fly into the enemy and explode. Lieutenant Roger Hayes piloted one of these ships. He was 23 years old and had volunteered for this mission knowing he would die. His ship was so small he had to lie down to fit inside. Above his head was a red button. When he pushed it, the nuclear bomb beneath him would explode. Roger flew straight into the swarm's center. Devourer tentacles reached for his ship, but he was moving too fast. He saw a massive mouth opening in front of him, big enough to swallow a space station. He flew right into it. "For humanity," Roger whispered, and pushed the button. The explosion ripped through the Devourer from the inside. Nuclear fire burst. Out of every opening in the creature, it screamed, a sound that somehow traveled through the vacuum of space, and then it died. 49 other coffin ships did the same thing. 50 humans died in the first 10 minutes of battle, but they took thousands of Devourers with them. On the battleship Vengeance, Captain Jake Morrison watched the battle unfold. His ship was different from the others. It had been modified with an experimental weapon that everyone said was insane. "Captain, we're in position," his navigator reported. Jake stood up. "Deploy the gray goo." Gray goo was a swarm of microscopic robots programmed to consume everything and turn it into more robots. It was the most dangerous weapon humans had ever created. If it got out of control, it could eat entire planets. Jake's crew released canisters of gray goo directly into the Devourer swarm. The microscopic robots landed on the biomechanical creatures and immediately started eating. The Devourers tried to adapt, but the robots were too small, too numerous. They spread like a virus, turning the Devourers' own mass against them. Meanwhile, Colonel Sam Hughes led the Marine assault. Their ships were not trying to win a space battle. They were trying to get inside the Devourer hive ships, the massive creatures that coordinated the swarm. Sam's assault craft punched through the side of a hive ship using a nuclear-tipped drill. The Marines poured out into the alien environment. The inside of the Devourer was a nightmare of organic corridors that pulsed like veins. The air was toxic, filled with acid that ate through their suits. "Flamethrowers up front," Sam ordered. Private Danny Miller stepped forward with his flamethrower. The weapon was primitive by galactic standards, just chemicals that burned very hot. But the Devourers had never encountered fire as a weapon. Their biomechanical bodies, designed to resist energy weapons, burned like paper. Danny sprayed fire down the corridor. The walls themselves caught fire, screaming as they burned. The Devourers had never known pain like this. They started to retreat, something they had never done before. "Move! Move! Move!" Sam shouted. The Marines pushed deeper into the hive ship. They carried backpack nukes, each one powerful enough to level a city. Their mission was simple: reach the brain and destroy it. Corporal Beth Adams led another squad through a different section. She was small for a Marine, but what she lacked, in size she made up for in determination. Her squad encountered Devourer drones, smaller versions of the main creatures that acted as internal defense. The drones adapted quickly to their weapons. When the Marines used plasma rifles, the drones grew heat shields. When they switched to projectile weapons, the drones grew armor. Chemical weapons, Beth ordered. Her squad switched to acid sprayers. The acid was simple, primitive, the kind of weapon that civilized species hadn't used in thousands of years. But it worked. The drones dissolved, screaming as they melted into puddles of biomechanical soup. Back in space, the battle was turning into chaos. Human ships were ramming into Devourers, detonating their cores on impact. The destroyer Phoenix, its weapons, depleted, accelerated to maximum speed and crashed into a hive ship's mouth. The captain's last words were, "See you in hell." Admiral Joe watched from the Retribution as his fleet tore itself apart to hurt the enemy. "Status report. We've lost 60 ships," Nina said. "But we've destroyed approximately 30% of the swarm." It wasn't enough. The Devourers were still advancing toward the core worlds. Joe made a decision that would haunt him forever. Deploy the Omega Protocol. Nina's face went white. "Sir, that will kill everything in this system, including our own people." "I know." Joe's voice was heavy with the weight of his decision. "But if we don't stop them here, they'll consume the entire galaxy." The Omega Protocol was humanity's last resort. It was a weapon that created a temporary black hole, lasting just long enough to consume everything within 1,000,000 kilometers before evaporating. As Joe prepared to give the final order, something unexpected happened. The Devourers started to retreat. For the first time in recorded history, they were running away. "Sir, I'm reading massive casualties in the swarm," Nina reported. "The gray goo is spreading faster than they can adapt. The nuclear strikes are causing cascade failures in their hive mind network." On the hive ship, Beth's squad had reached the brain. It was a massive organ, the size of a sports stadium, pulsing with electrical signals. Beth placed her nuclear device against it. "All squads, this is Adams, fire in the hole." She detonated the bomb. The explosion vaporized the brain and sent a psychic scream through the entire swarm. Devourers throughout the system writhed in pain as their coordination collapsed. More hive ships exploded as Marine squads completed their missions. Some Marines made it back to their ships. Most didn't, but every death hurt the swarm more than it hurt humanity. Captain Jake Morrison made the final decisive move. His ship's fusion core was damaged, leaking radiation that would kill his crew in hours. Instead of retreating, he had an idea. "All hands abandon ship," Jake ordered, except for volunteers for one last mission. 10 crew members stayed behind. Together they flew the dying ship into the heart of the swarm where the Devourers were thickest. Jake overloaded the fusion core, turning his ship into a miniature star. The explosion was visible from 3 solar systems away. It burned through the Devourer swarm like a blade of pure light, vaporizing everything in its path. The swarm's formation broke completely. And then something nobody expected happened. The Devourers sent a signal. It wasn't words, but everyone understood it anyway. It was fear. The Devourers were afraid. They fled. The entire swarm, what was left of it, turned and ran back to whatever dark corner of space they had come from. They left behind the husks of their dead, floating in space like monuments to humanity's violence. Admiral Joe stood on his bridge, looking at the devastation. They had won, but at a terrible cost. 60% of the human fleet was gone. The Galactic Council chamber was silent. Not the comfortable silence of thought, but the horrified silence that comes after witnessing something that changes everything. Every representative from every species sat frozen in their seats, their various eyes, optical organs, and sensory apparatus fixed on the main display screen that had just gone dark. Ambassador Krex's tentacles had turned a pale gray color that other Zorathians would recognize as deep shock. The Velkari representatives' energy form flickered weakly like a dying light bulb. Zek 9, the proud Thraxian warrior, had his head bowed so low his mandibles touched the floor. They had just finished watching 18 hours of combat footage from the battle with the Devourers. Every second of it had been recorded by human helmet cameras, ship sensors, and drone feeds. They had asked to see how humanity had saved them. Now they wished they hadn't. Admiral Joe Carter stood at the podium where Krex had stood just days before when announcing the ban on human military participation. Joe's uniform was still torn and burned from the battle. He had refused to change it before this meeting. He wanted them to see the cost of their salvation. That was the edited version, Joe said quietly. His voice carried through the silent chamber like thunder. I removed the worst parts. You wouldn't have been able to watch them. The Malthari representative, a small furry being named Pip, raised a trembling paw. The worst parts? What could be worse than what we just saw? Joe looked at the small alien with tired eyes. Private Carl Young, 20 years old. His helmet cam recorded his last 17 minutes of life. Would you like to see what one human can do when he knows he's already dead? Nobody answered. They had already seen enough impossible things. They had watched humans use their own ships as weapons, ramming them into enemies like ancient warriors. They had seen Marines fight with broken bones sticking out of their arms. They had watched a human bite through a devourer's neural cord when her weapons ran out. But the footage of Private Carl Young was different. It had made even veteran human soldiers sick to watch. Play it, Krex whispered. We need to see everything. Joe nodded to Kyle Brown, who was operating the display system. Kyle's hands hesitated over the controls. He had watched this footage once and still had nightmares. The screen came to life. It showed the view from Carl Young's helmet cam. He was inside a Devourer hive ship, separated from his squad. His rifle was broken. His suit was torn in multiple places, and the toxic atmosphere was eating through his skin like acid. A massive Devourer drone blocked his path to the evacuation point. It was the size of a building, covered in armor that had adapted to resist human weapons. Carl had no weapons left. He had no chance of survival. The toxic air had already done too much damage. Carl made a decision that no civilized being would ever consider. He took off his helmet. The council gasped as they watched the young human's face immediately begin to blister and burn in the toxic atmosphere. His eyes went red with burst blood vessels. His skin started to melt. But Carl didn't scream. He smiled. He walked toward the Devourer drone. It didn't see him as a threat. What could one dying human do against something so large and powerful? Carl reached the drone and did something that would haunt the galaxy's nightmares forever. He bit into its neural cord, the organic cable that connected it to the hive mind. The acid in the atmosphere had turned Carl's own saliva into a corrosive weapon. His stomach acid, exposed through his dissolving throat, poured onto the neural tissue. The drone thrashed in agony, something it had never felt before. Carl held on with his teeth even as his face melted away. He held on as his hands dissolved to bone. He held on until the neural cord severed completely, killing the drone and sending a wave of pain through the entire hive network. The last image from Carl's helmet cam showed him still standing, a skeleton covered in melting flesh, still smiling as he died. Kyle turned off the footage. Several council members had to leave the chamber to vomit or whatever their species did when extremely distressed. That young man was a farmer's son from Iowa, Joe said. He joined the Marines because he wanted to see the galaxy. He was going to propose to his girlfriend when he got home. Lisa Park stepped forward to stand beside Joe. She had brought a data pad with her. Should I read the list? What list? The Velkari representative asked, though its voice suggested it didn't really want to know. The list of violations of galactic law we committed in that battle, Lisa said. She activated her pad. Use of antimatter weapons, deployment of self-replicating nanotechnology, suicide attacks, use of nuclear weapons in populated systems, chemical weapons, biological warfare, deliberate destruction of our own ships to use as weapons. Should I continue? The list is 3 pages long. Zek-9 raised his head slightly. You saved us. The methods do not matter. Don't they? Joe asked. Yesterday you called us barbarians. You said we were too violent for civilized space. You were right. We are barbarians, we are monsters, but we're your monsters. Amy Watson walked into the chamber carrying a sealed box. She placed it on the podium in front of Joe. What is that? Krex asked. Joe opened the box and pulled out a small vial of gray dust. Gray goo. Inactive now, but this is what we used against the Devourers. 1 gram of this could eat a moon if it got out of control. We have weapons that could destroy entire solar systems. We have viruses that could wipe out all organic life in the galaxy. We have bombs that could crack planets in half. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But we don't use them, Joe continued. We keep them locked away, hidden, controlled, because we know what we are. We know what we're capable of. We've spent 10,000 years learning to control our violence, to channel it, to use it only when necessary. Colonel Sam Hughes entered the chamber. He was using a walking stick, his leg still healing from the battle. Behind him came 3 Marines carrying another box. This one much larger. Colonel Hughes lost 40% of his Marines in the battle, Joe said. Men and women who knew they were going to die but went anyway, because that's what humans do. Sam opened the large box and began pulling out items. Dog tags from dead Marines, pieces of destroyed ships, a child's drawing that one Marine had carried with him, now stained with blood. Each of these belonged to someone who died to save you, Sam said. His voice was rough with emotion. They didn't die for humanity. We were safe. We could have stayed in our own space and let the Devourers eat you all. They died for you. For people who banned us. For people who called us monsters. The Thraxian delegation leader, a different one from Zek-9, stood up. Why? Why would your people die for us when we treated you so badly? It was Danny Miller who answered. The young private had survived the battle and now stood with his squad. Because that's what monsters do in human stories. The monster saves the village that hates it. The dragon protects the kingdom that fears it. We've been telling these stories for thousands of years. Joe picked up one of the dog tags from the box. Private Jennifer Hart, 19 years old. She flew a coffin ship into a devourer mouth. Her last words were, "Tell the aliens they're welcome." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Finally, Krex spoke. The ban on human military participation is lifted, permanently, by unanimous decree. Further, the Velkari added, its energy form pulsing with each word, humanity is granted full military authority in all matters of galactic defense. Joe shook his head. We don't want authority. We don't want to rule you. We just want to be treated as equals. No better, no worse. After what we've seen, Krex's tentacles writhed. How can we see you as equals? You're terrifying. Lisa stepped forward. Good. You should be terrified of us. But remember, we're terrified of ourselves too. That's why we have so many rules, so many laws, so many controls on our violence. Because we know what happens when we let the monster loose. Kyle Brown, who had been quiet until now, raised his hand. Admiral, should I show them the tactical analysis? Joe nodded. Kyle brought up a new display showing the battle from a strategic overview. Red dots for human ships, black for Devourers. The Devourers outnumbered us 50-1, Kyle explained. They had consumed enough mass to equal a small moon. By every calculation, we should have lost in the first hour. But you didn't, Pip, the Malthari representative, said softly. No, Kyle agreed. Because we didn't fight to win. We fought to hurt them so badly they would run away. Every human who died took hundreds of them with them. We turned our weakness into a weapon. We made dying into a tactical advantage. The display showed the moment Jake Morrison's ship became a star. The explosion was so bright, it whited out the entire tactical display for several seconds. Captain Morrison had 30 minutes to evacuate his crew, Joe said. He used 29 of those minutes to position his ship for maximum damage. He and 10 volunteers stayed behind to make sure the explosion happened at exactly the right moment. The radiation alone should have killed them before they could detonate, the Velkari observed. It did, Joe confirmed. They were dead for the last 3 minutes. The ship's computer has recordings of them still working their stations even as radiation dissolved their bodies. Dead humans finishing their mission because their minds hadn't realized their bodies had stopped working. This was too much for several council members. The idea that humans— 6 months had passed since the battle with the Devourers. Station Prime had been rebuilt, its crystal walls gleaming with new defensive systems designed by human engineers. The galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace, but it was a different kind of peace than before. It was the peace that comes when everyone knows there's a sleeping dragon in the room, and they're very careful not to wake it. Ambassador Krex stood in the same council chamber where he had once banned humans from military service. The irony was not lost on him. Today, the chamber was packed. Every species in the galactic community had sent representatives. They weren't here for a normal meeting. They were here because something new had appeared at the edge of known space. The Crimson Ravagers. Joe Carter entered the chamber wearing his full military dress uniform. It had been 6 months since the Devourer battle, but he looked like he had aged years. Command does that to a person, especially when command means deciding who lives and who dies. Behind Joe came Lisa Park, Amy Watson, Kyle Brown, and Sam Hughes. The human delegation took their seats at what had once been the observers section. Now it was the military command section. Nobody had officially made that change. It had just happened. Admiral Carter, Krex began, his tentacles showing the purple color of respect. Thank you for coming. Joe nodded. Show me what we're dealing with. Kyle had already connected his datapad to the main display. The screen showed the edge of the galaxy, where stars became sparse and space turned truly dark. But something was moving in that darkness. Ships, if you could call them that. They looked like mechanical spiders the size of small planets, their legs spanning entire solar systems. The Crimson Ravagers, Krex said. They appeared 3 days ago. They're not eating planets like the Devourers did. They're harvesting them. The display showed a planet being carefully taken apart piece by piece, its resources sorted and stored in the spider thing's massive bodies. They sent a message, the Velkari representative said. Its energy form pulsed nervously. They claim this galaxy belongs to them. They say they planted life here billions of years ago as a crop, and now they've come to harvest it. Lisa leaned forward. How many? 12 of the large ones. Maybe 1,000 smaller vessels. They're methodical, organized. They're not animals, like the Devourers. They're intelligent. They have technology we don't understand. Sam Hughes studied the tactical display. What have you tried? Zek-9 clicked his mandibles in frustration. Everything. Negotiations. Threats. We sent a diplomatic vessel to communicate with them. And? They dissected it, took it apart piece by piece while the crew was still alive. They broadcast the whole thing back to us. They said they were studying their crop to see if it was ready for harvest. Amy Watson pulled up her own data. Their technology is at least 1,000 years ahead of most galactic community species. Their shields are impenetrable to standard weapons. Their hulls are made of some material we can't identify. Joe stood up and walked to the display. He studied the Crimson Ravagers for a long moment. You want us to fight them? It wasn't a question. Krex's tentacles drooped. The motion has already been passed. Unanimous vote. The human military has full authority to respond to this threat however you see fit. No restrictions? Joe asked. No complaints about our methods? No wringing of tentacles about war crimes? No. Krek said simply. We've learned our lesson. When facing extinction, there are no rules. Joe turned to face the full council. You understand what you're asking? The devourers were animals. They felt pain. They could be scared. These things might not even have emotions. We might have to become something worse than monsters to stop them. Pip, the small Malthari representative, stood on his chair to be seen. We know. We're asking you to save us again. And we're sorry. Sorry for the ban. Sorry for calling you primitive. Sorry for not understanding that sometimes the galaxy needs warriors, not diplomats. Joe looked at his team. They had already discussed this on the way to the station. They knew what had to be done. We'll need resources, Lisa said. Every fabricator in the galaxy working on weapons. Every scientist working on new ways to kill. Every able-bodied person ready to fight or support those who do. Done, Krek said immediately. We'll need to break more laws, Sam added. Weapons that make antimatter look like firecrackers. Things that could break reality itself if we're not careful. Done. Kyle stood up, his young face serious. We'll need to access the forbidden archives, the records of weapons that were banned not just by the galactic community, but by the ancient civilizations that came before. This caused murmuring among the council. The forbidden archives contained knowledge that had been locked away for millions of years, weapons that had destroyed entire civilizations, technologies that should never be used. Done, Krek said, though his voice shook. Joe walked back to his seat. Then we have work to do. The Crimson Ravagers have made a mistake. They think we're just another crop to be harvested. They don't know what humans are. They don't know what we've done to survive. They don't know that we've been preparing for something like them our entire existence. He stood and saluted the council. Give us 2 weeks to prepare, then we'll show them why humanity is the galaxy's nightmare. 2 weeks later, the human fleet approached the Crimson Ravagers. But it wasn't the same fleet that had fought the Devourers. These ships were different. Wrong. They hurt to look at, as if reality itself didn't want them to exist. The lead ship was something humanity had built in secret, using knowledge from the forbidden archives. It was called the Reality Breaker, and it carried a weapon that shouldn't exist, a device that could temporarily rewrite the laws of physics in a localized area. Captain Jake Morrison had volunteered to command it, even though everyone knew that using the weapon would probably kill everyone on board in ways that couldn't be properly described. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Ravagers, his communications officer reported. The screen lit up with an image that hurt to process. The Ravager representative didn't have a fixed form. It kept shifting between different states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes gas, sometimes something else entirely. Primitive species, it said in a voice that sounded like mathematics given sound. You dare approach the harvesters? We who seeded this galaxy? We who are your creators? Jake smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Creators? Maybe. But every child eventually surpasses their parents, and some children kill their parents. The Ravager's form shifted to something like amusement. You cannot harm us. We exist partially outside your dimensional space. Your weapons cannot touch us. Our old weapons, Jake corrected. But we've been reading some interesting books lately. Books your kind probably wrote millions of years ago. Books about how to break reality itself. For the first time, the Ravager seemed uncertain. The forbidden archives were sealed. No species has the capability to understand those technologies. No sane species, Jake agreed. But humans? We're not entirely sane. We looked at weapons that could unravel space-time and thought that might be useful. Behind Jake's ship, the rest of the human fleet spread out. Each ship carried weapons that violated not just galactic law, but the fundamental rules of existence. Devices that could create pocket universes and collapse them. Weapons that could age targets 1,000,000 years in seconds. Bombs that could turn matter into pure thought and then erase the thought. But the real weapon wasn't any of these. The real weapon was humanity itself. Sam Hughes led the ground forces aboard massive boarding craft. These weren't normal Marines. They had volunteered for experimental procedures, letting scientists alter their bodies with technology from the archives. Some had extra arms grafted on. Others had their nervous systems replaced with quantum processors. A few had been turned into living weapons, their blood replaced with nanobots that could eat through anything. "Remember," Sam told his altered Marines, "we're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to traumatize them so badly they never come back." The battle began. Jake fired the reality breaker. Space itself screamed. The laws of physics bent and broke around the Crimson Ravager flagship. Suddenly, in that localized area, gravity worked backwards. Time flowed sideways. Matter became energy, became thought, became nothing, became everything. The Ravager ship, which had existed partially outside normal space, was suddenly forced fully into reality. And in reality, it could be hurt. The human fleet opened fire with impossible weapons. Beams of pure entropy that aged sections of the Ravager ships into dust. Missiles that existed in multiple dimensions at once, hitting their targets in the past, present, and future simultaneously. Bombs that created temporary black holes that existed for exactly 3.7 seconds before evaporating. The Ravagers tried to adapt, but how do you adapt to chaos itself? How do you defend against weapons that shouldn't exist? The boarding parties hit. Next, Sam's altered Marines punched through the Ravager hulls using tools that cut through dimensional barriers. They poured into the alien ships, bringing horrors with them. Private Danny Miller, his body now more machine than man, released a swarm of nanobots that had been programmed with one instruction: consume and convert. The Ravager ship's interior began turning into more nanobots, which made more nanobots, which made more nanobots.